You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 23rd of September 2024 on Monocle Radio. Hello and a warm welcome to The Briefing, coming to you live from Studio 1 here at Midori House in London. I'm Emma Nelson, and coming up on today's programme.
We
have a clear goal, ensuring the safe return of Israel's northern communities to their homes, and we will take all necessary measures to achieve it.
Israel intensifies its strikes on Hezbollah in Lebanon. We'll be live in Beirut for the latest. Also coming up...
Mais je ne vais pas exclure dans l'effort national qu'il faudra faire que les personnes les plus fortunées participent, comme certains balles, ils font partie de la communauté nationale. Certaines très grandes sociétés multinationales qui marchent bien peuvent aussi contribuer à l'effort national de redressement. C'est notre intérêt.
Michel Barnier pulls together a right-wing government for France, but the left-wing opposition says it'll immediately try to bring it down. We'll explore the options available for a seemingly impossible situation. We'll hear more about the president of the UAE's trip to Washington, plus why are South Korea and Czechia getting closer. Plus, we'll enjoy the latest wine news too. That's all coming up right here on The Briefing with me, Emma Nelson. Israel has urged civilians in parts of Lebanon to evacuate from their homes as it steps up its bombardment of Hezbollah targets. Dozens of Israeli warplanes have attacked more than 150 targets in the last 24 hours. It's part of an aerial offensive that's expected to continue all day. Well, I'm joined now on the line from Beirut by Hannah McCarthy, who's a foreign correspondent there. A very good afternoon to you, Hannah.
Good afternoon, Emma.
So could you just bring us up to date with the latest on the military action?
Sure. So there's been intense bombardments across South Lebanon and in the eastern part of Lebanon today. And then also there was one strike in Byblos north of Beirut. This is the first time we've seen an Israeli strike north of Beirut. It's not clear whether it was intentional at the moment, but I mean, if it wasn't intentional, it underscores the danger. And I think it's also possible that it was something of a warning shot that, you know, the war could come closer to the north of Lebanon. That's kind of remained kind of out of the war so far, particularly after Hezbollah's attack close to Haifa over the weekend, which was their deepest barrage since the war began.
How is it feeling where you are?
Things are definitely tense today. People, I think, are stocking up on money. The payment, one of the payment transfer apps isn't working today. People are circulating lists of things to prepare. I have one friend who's looking for somewhere for like a pregnant friend to stay near a hospital because they're worried they might not be able to travel. So I think everyone's making kind of contingency plans at the moment. There's not panic, but there's a lot of planning, I think, at the moment.
So there is definitely the sense that something bigger is coming down the track. I mean, how much is this being seen as a certainty that the increase in military action that we've seen this weekend will just intensify until there is, to all intents and purposes, an all-out war between Hezbollah and Israel?
I don't think there's a sense that it's absolutely certain yet, but I think people definitely feel like they want to protect themselves and they need to like take some of the risks more seriously. Beirut obviously has frequently seen episodes like this, and a lot of people have a memory. So, I mean, for those who could afford to, many have already left, and they've left kind of, you know, during the earlier part of the war. There's also a lot of people in Lebanon who simply can't leave. They don't have the means. They're not able to leave the country. They can't get visas. So there's a lot of people who have to weather the storm here. So, I mean, I don't think it's a certainty yet, but certainly there's contingency planning.
Just explain to us how much of an influence Hezbollah has over daily life in Lebanon, given the fact that it is a separate group, it is supported in the main by Iran, yet it seems to be dragging a country into a conflict.
Sure. Well, I mean, if you live and work in certain areas of Lebanon and certain areas of Beirut, you will basically never see Hezbollah. They will not, you will not interact with them at all. If you live in certain neighborhoods, like in southern Beirut or in the south of Lebanon, they will be a much bigger presence. Your children might attend schools that they fund. You might go to the hospital that's run by Hezbollah. Your local MP will be a member of the Hezbollah party. So, I mean, it's quite a big division in that sense, and that there's people in parts of Lebanon who will have virtually no interaction with Hezbollah. But it is an extremely powerful force that basically now has a veto over the Lebanese government, which is why it has effectively been able to bring the country into a war, despite the fact that most people here don't want one.
Do we know what the likelihood is of Hezbollah ever capitulating in terms of it wants the war in Gaza to stop, yet Israel is showing no signs of that? So how robust are its defences and its forces were Israel to step up its offensive?
Well, I mean, they're certainly weaker than they had hoped for. And I think certainly among its own members, there are some questions about how it managed its security and its intelligence if it was able to experience such a series of devastating blows last week. And I mean, we talk about the 7th of October as a kind of watershed moment for Israelis who felt their state didn't protect them. And I think there's certainly some concerns among Hezbollah members or their local community about what their capabilities are if they allowed the attacks last week to happen. That said, that they did show off some missiles that they hadn't used before in their attack on Haifa over the weekend. A kind of sign, I guess, that there's more to come and that there's more that they aren't using. But at the same time, Hezbollah's aim is often viewed less as this idea of victory over Israel, but more an idea that over time they will wear down Israel's kind of defenses and their time. And also, again, it's a kind of public war as well, in the sense after the pager attacks last week, we also saw, countries discussing more arms embargoes than Israel. So, I mean, there's a different approach to Hezbollah's war against Israel than just kind of an idea of victory over Israel.
Indeed. I mean, Hezbollah launched, more than 100 rockets, cruise missiles and drones towards northern Israel this weekend. And that is a sense that it does have the wherewithal to really participate fully in any conflict.
I think we see the fact that Hezbollah was not targeting large population centres, I think in Israel is still a sign that it does not want an all-out war and that it still wants something of a contained conflict. Obviously, we are effectively in a war footing, and for anyone in the south of Lebanon, the country is at war. But it still seems like they don't want an all-out war, and I mean, it's not clear that they will have missiles. I think what Iran has shown is Iran keeps its kind of larger arsenal for direct threats to Iran, whereas Hezbollah does not have the same resources available to it in engaging with Israel.
And indeed, the Israeli Defence Minister, Yoav Gallant, has called for calm, saying that people must be calm after the military launched its most widespread range against Hezbollah. The targeting here by the Israelis is the south, eastern Bekaa Valley and northern region near to Syria. Is there a sense that people are listening to what the Israelis are saying, or indeed what the Defence Minister is saying? And indeed, the more pertinent question of whether Benjamin Netanyahu is listening to Yoav Gallant. One is getting the impression that he's calling for calm across the board.
I mean, Yoav Gallant has made some pretty strong statements about, the need for military action in southern Lebanon. And he's also obviously got an ongoing issue with whether he's about to be fired by Netanyahu or not. He is perceived as a slightly calmer mind than Netanyahu, but at the same time, he has definitely been calling for stronger military action in the weeks. So I think calling for calm now at this point after, he was involved in the decision making around the pager attacks, for example, last week. I mean, Israel has not publicly taken responsibility for those, but again, they're widely attributed to Israel. So I think those statements perhaps are designed to, again, for an Israeli audience, and again, obviously huge numbers spent hours in shelters over the weekend, and hundreds of thousands of people who haven't had to before. So there's definitely a sense of fear in Israeli society. So I guess he's trying to calm them, but at the same time, his approach to southern Lebanon has certainly escalated the tensions there.
Hannah McCarthy in Beirut, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. You're listening to The Briefing with me, Emma Nelson. Now here's Tom Webb with the summary of the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Emma. Sri Lanka has a new president after a historic second round of vote counting. The choice of left-wing anti-corruption candidate Anura Kumara Dissanayake signals a major shift in the political order as the country recovers from 2022's economic crisis. Taiwan's military has denied a Chinese state media claim that it funds an internet army to spread disinformation in China. Beijing accused Taiwan-backed hacking group Anonymous 64 of cyber attacks and urged reports of anti-propaganda sabotage. Taiwan says China is the real disruptor of cyber attacks and military harassment. Donald Trump says he won't run for the US presidency again if he loses this year's election. The 78-year-old former president said he hopes that's not what will happen. He's currently trailing Democratic nominee Kamala Harris in the head-to-head poll. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Emma.
Thank you very much indeed, Tom. Now, France has a new government. But for how much longer? The country's Prime Minister Michel Barnier has pulled together a lineup of right-wing and centre-right politicians, and this has not gone down well with the left, who have promised, as the group which won the biggest number of votes in the parliamentary elections earlier this year, that a vote of no confidence is on the cards. Well, I'm joined now by Florence Biederman, who's journalist and political analyst. She joins me on the line from Paris. A very good afternoon to you, Florence.
Good afternoon, Emma.
So this was supposed to create calm, and it appears to have done the absolute opposite.
Well, I mean, calm. Nobody was really optimistic about calm, because from the start, the fact that Emmanuel Macron, after having convoked those snap elections, didn't choose a prime minister from the alliance of the left that came first in the vote, meant that there would be trouble anyway. So it shows Michel Barnier, who is seen as somebody calm, who will try to make compromise, maybe who is ready to dialogue. He's known also in France as being somehow the architect of the Brexit negotiations. So it was supposed. I mean, it was maybe the worst choice he could do. Choosing somebody from the right side, the conservatives, but with the kind of calm attitude and not inflaming things more than they are already considering the situation.
So the choice of Michel Barnier, a problem to begin with. Now, who's in the lineup of the government that's caused so much problem?
Well, the lineup has been, somehow, it was not expected to be a government including personalities from the left. In any case, they refused, to take part in the government. So you knew from the start there wouldn't be anybody from the left alliance. There is maybe the justice minister who is a former socialist. But apart from him, I mean, all the others are coming from either Macron's party, or from the right, the conservative party, Les Républicains, who has some, maybe 50 MPs, over 500 in parliament. They are one of the losers of those snap elections, and still they have many of the important ministries. So that's also the fact is that many of them are from the, let's say, hard side of the party. They are not the more liberal one. They are really like the hard right. And that also, of course, has been seen as a kind of provocation by the electorate on the left.
Indeed, how much was this the choice of Michel Barnier himself to choose people from Les Républicains, from further along the right? Or is he slightly hamstrung by the fact that ultimately it's Emmanuel Macron who has to give his approval for the cabinet?
Well, I mean, he had to choose. He refused to choose somebody from the left, pretending or saying that they would be censored in parliament, and that would have probably been the case, considering the far right Front National and also part of the centrists said they didn't want a government with a minister from the far left. So, okay, that being excluded, then what was the choice left? It was a bit difficult considering his party lost the election and lost dozens of MPs. It was a bit difficult to again nominate somebody from his own party as prime minister. So the only choice that was left was somebody of the moderate right, and that's how Barnier came. First, the moderate right said, we don't want to make a government with Macron. We don't want to make an alliance. But, already many of them had left their party to be part of Macron's government, and Macron's government has been shifting to the right progressively since years. So now it's somehow the logical conclusion, the only choice he had left somehow.
So what happens next, given the fact that we have a budget plan to Parliament that needs to be submitted, and we also have got both the left and the right threatening a vote of no confidence immediately?
What happens is probably there will be a vote of confidence, and the left will try to, not topple the government. They cannot. They don't have enough votes. So now that means that the only party really who has kind of a choice on what's going to happen is the far right, because as soon as they censor the government, as the left already said they will censor it, then the government will collapse. So this government from the start has been under the threat of censorship by Front National, by the far right, which means its existence is depending on the decision of the far right, which in itself already is something pretty. You cannot go out from the mathematics. The numbers make the far right be kind of arbitrating what's going on in French politics and with this government. So how long will it stay in power? You can guess that as soon as the far right, Marine Le Pen's far right, will think they're strong enough, for a next round of election, they will censor the government. This is really one of the possible scenarios. So 1-2 years, you don't know, maybe a few months, who knows?
Florence Biedermann, I'm sure we'll hear from you again on that subject. Thank you so much for joining us on the line from Paris. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. The president of the UAE is in Washington for a meeting with his US counterpart. It is Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan's first visit to the US in an official capacity. As well as seeing President Biden, the Sheikh will also hold a meeting with the Vice President and Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris. Well, to tell us more about the meeting, I'm joined now by Mustafa Al-Rawi, journalist and writer based in the UAE. He joins me on the line now from Dubai. A very good afternoon to you, Mustafa.
Good afternoon, Emma.
So this meeting takes place at a moment when the region, the Middle East, faces major challenges, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's a critical time for this meeting. And the briefings to journalists over here from UAE officials certainly creating the significance of that context, but also that there will be other factors being discussed, such as what they call geoeconomics, and the potential for cooperating in a number of sectors. So there's a lot at stake, actually, from this visit.
So let's deal with each issue in sort of sequence. Let's talk about the difficulties the major crises that are escalating in that part of the world. What role can the UAE play in terms of dealing with the major countries who are tied up in crisis, such as Israel, also Iran, and now it appears increasingly Lebanon?
Well, I think it's almost as if there are two Middle Easts going on at the same time. We talk about conflict as we're seeing today with the escalation between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon, and also the ongoing crisis in Gaza as well since October, and sort of the tensions that are there. But also, in the UAE and the Gulf, there's also a lot of opportunity that authorities and companies are looking to build on and create jobs and prosperity. So as the president of the UAE goes to Washington, he's balancing the need to kind of avert a wider escalation in the region, which will obviously have an impact on the ambitions of the UAE and the GCC region, but also at the same time to ensure that prosperity and opportunity is also part of the conversation. It doesn't just become sort of a segue into, okay, how do we deal with de-escalation? Because I think both these tracks are equally important at this time.
Indeed. The meeting that's being held between Joe Biden and the Sheikh is, and I'm looking at the UAE Embassy's website here, saying that the two leaders will explore opportunities to further enhance bilateral cooperation and boost a strategic partnership, particularly in economy, investment, technology, artificial intelligence, space, renewable energy, climate action, sustainability solutions, and other aspects. I mean, where do you begin with that shopping list?
I think if we begin with sort of the areas in which most recently there's been progress and cooperation, space is one where NASA and the UAE Space Agency have been working on missions together. We had UAE astronauts flying on US missions as well. You also have with climate change and COP28 that was in the UAE at the end of last year, and some of the progress that was made, at least in terms of the UAE consensus and moving forward, that was very much cooperation with powers such as the US. And also in technology, the UAE wants to be a hub for AI. And AI at the moment is quite political, particularly when it comes to the US. You're seeing the attitude from Congress and others in terms of being wary of China and other countries. And so you really need sort of political approval to be able to be a full partner when it comes to things like AI. So those three areas, I think, are going to be very important during this visit.
How important is it for the UAE to push ahead at the speed that it wishes to, given the fact that there is an enormous amount of investment being made into the likes of Saudi, that the Saudi Arabians are pushing ahead with an enormous tourism plan. They are building airports. They are trying to effectively make themselves the regional hub.
Yeah, and I think that competition has probably been very good overall, for all sides, because it was telling a story about, the future and where things were going. And certainly it was keeping the GCC top of mind. But to go back to where we started this conversation, it's very difficult to sell any kind of narrative like that when you have the wider problems going on with the Palestinians and what's happening now with regards to Lebanon. So I think it becomes in everybody's interest to at least have an environment in which you can discuss these things. And then, there's no point fighting or competing or being rivals over something that is not growing. And I think unless everybody can be on the same page with regards to settling down these tensions and reducing these conflicts and getting ceasefires, then really there's nothing to really compete over.
Mustafa Al-Rawi, thank you so much as ever for joining us on Monocle Radio. You're with The Briefing. Now, Seoul and Prague may be separated by more than 8,000 kilometres, but the two capitals are making efforts to collaborate more closely. This weekend saw a visit by the South Korean president to the Czech capital, during which he pledged to deepen cooperation in the nuclear energy sector, technology, transport and infrastructure. Well, to tell us more, I'm joined now by the Prague-based journalist Rob Cameron. Good afternoon, Rob.
Yeah, hello.
So how did this coming together come about?
I think really this is all related to a major initiative, a major development, a major deal between the Czech Republic and South Korea concerning modernization, expansion of the Czech Republic's one of the Czech Republic's two nuclear power plants. That's in a place called Dukovany in Moravia. The Czechs have been looking for a long time to expand that, to build two new reactors. And earlier this summer, it was South Korea's KHNP state company that won that tender to expand that nuclear plant. So everything else we're seeing, the announcement of these R&D joint ventures and joint investment projects between the Czech Republic and Korea, I think they all stem from that as we see these two economies and countries move closer and closer.
Tell us a little bit more about what will happen with the Czech Republic's new nuclear power plant. We have Team Korea as the preferred bidder, as you say. How logistically will this work?
Well, basically, as I say, yes, there are two plants in this country. Both of them are originally of Soviet design, but they've both been upgraded, modernized by various companies over the years. The one in Dukovany, they're actually going to build two new reactors. The present reactors are these Soviet reactor designs, and the Koreans are bringing in something called small modular reactors, which are much smaller, more flexible. You can build them in a row apparently and add to them as your electricity and energy needs increase. So it's sort of merging those two technologies. And there is even talk of Temelín, which is the second nuclear power plant in the Czech Republic, again, Soviet design with American Westinghouse technology on top. That perhaps could also be expanded by South Korea if the Dukovany project is a success. So it's combining, I suppose, two very different technologies to make the process of generating nuclear power in this country more efficient. And for the Czech Republic really to meet its ambitious climate goals, it says we have to ramp up nuclear power in our energy mix. If you want us to get rid of coal, we don't have the same renewables that other countries, perhaps, by the sea and in windier places do have. So we need nuclear. And this, I think, is the result.
Are the two countries coming together also because of the geopolitical similarities of both having problematic near neighbours? For Czechia, it's Russia, and for South Korea, it's China.
There's absolutely a geopolitical element to it. I mean, not so long ago, perhaps 10 years ago, the then president of the Czech Republic, Miloš Zeman, he made a great play of reaching out to China and being part of this new Belt and Road initiative and bringing Prague and Beijing much closer together. That's all in the past now. That's pretty much forgotten. Even when it was a priority of the then government, people were pointing out, well, why are you bothering with China when we have already such huge investments that dwarf the Chinese investments from South Korea and also Taiwan, very importantly. So what we've seen in the last sort of 5 years, I suppose, with the centre-right government is much more of an overture to those two countries, South Korea and Taiwan, which both have substantial investments. And Korea has been a presence in this country for quite a while. There's a huge Hyundai auto factory in North Moravia in Nošovice. They also make parts for the Kia Korean car plant in Slovakia. So really, that relationship is already here, and it's just a question of ramping it up and making it more important.
Finally, there is one area where the two countries are cooperating, which is that of beer, because apparently the only activity reportedly which is worse in South Korea than in North Korea is the brewing of beer. And apparently Gold of Prague is heading out there to sort this all out.
Yeah, there has been some talk about that. And I think, some people in the beer industry here are also quite skeptical that can be exported. But, beer today is a multinational industry, obviously. And when we talk about, Czech beer, sadly, we're not really talking about Czech-owned beer anymore. I think there's only one big brewery left in Czech hands. But of course, Czechs are very proud of the fact that they gave the world what we know as lager, with the first lager-type beer in Pilsen, giving birth to the name Pilsner as a type of beer that, of course, started life here in the Czech Republic in Pilsen, 1842. And all the other beers around the world, all the other light lagers are based on that. And there have been attempts, to export Czech technology to other countries around the world who want to make the same kind of beer with varying degrees of success. Some have been very, very successful, others less so.
Rob Cameron, thank you so much for joining us on the line. You're listening to Monocle Radio. In the last few minutes of today's episode of The Briefing, let's get the latest wine news, and who better to help us than Patrick Schmidt, Master of Wine and the Editor-in-Chief at the Drinks Business. Good afternoon, Patrick.
Very good afternoon.
Just listening to our last item, the idea of the Czechs exporting microbreweries to South Korea. Have you ever drunk South Korean beer?
I haven't. I have had some South Korean drinks. They do make some good local stuff. I've never tried their beer. But South Korea is a really burgeoning fine wine market, actually. So it's very exciting to see them embrace fine wine at a time when the rest of the world is drinking less.
So if the Czechs fail with the hops, then at least the grapes will do slightly better. Tell us a little bit more about the latest news that we're feeling. I mean, you're Editor-in-Chief at the Drinks Business, so perhaps this is in your interest, because there is an article in your publication that says that red wine helps reduce dementia. Now, why on earth would you ever want to write that article?
I can think of so many reasons. Mostly, actually, it was nice to see that bit of news over the weekend, which we wrote up this morning, because there's so much negative news at the moment surrounding alcohol. There's a lot of stuff that's promulgated saying that alcohol at any level is dangerous. So it's nice to see that I should stress moderate drinking is good for your health. You know, there's almost a century worth of studies proving this. And now they're talking about its role in dementia. And as there's no effective treatment for dementia, we need to look at preventative techniques to deal with what is a growing and tragic and horrific disease. And if red wine can play a role in that, then great.
Patrick, help me out here, because each week we get a different publication which effectively says red wine is either kill or cure. And it's quite sweet to see the fact that your article has incorporated things like oats and berries and things that we would normally see as being promoted as helping us. I mean, how long is this debate going to continue? Is it until you win?
God, I'm afraid we're losing. We're very much losing. The movement is totally against alcohol at the moment, and people are drinking less anyway, so we don't really need to constantly bash it. But it'll be ongoing until they ban it, I suppose, and then it'll flourish again, as we saw during Prohibition in the States. Nothing like making something out of reach to make it really popular. But essentially, look, let's be honest. People don't drink for the health benefits. They drink for the pleasure it gives them, the emotional pleasure and the taste. But red wine in small quantities contains good beneficial minerals, things like polyphenols, famously resveratrol. It's good for heart health, it's good for the gut biome, and it's good for the mind as well. It makes us happy. So I think we should focus on some of the positives. And the last thing I would say is, you know, red wine has been part of the so-called Mediterranean diet for centuries, and that is meant to be the secret to a long and healthy life. And if you look at the blue zones of the world, which are parts of the world where there's the highest number of people who live over the age of 100, they're all areas where people drink, and they drink socially, moderately, but socially. So good for the mind and body. I'm sold.
Let's talk about champagne. Not red wine, but it's having a very strange year in terms of production.
Yeah, I feel sorry for the Champenois. I mean, we've seen it here. Look, it's not that far away. We're talking about northern France, just across the channel. For those of you based in the UK will know that the summer's been pretty wretched. It's been wet. It's been warm and damp. And that is really bad for grapes because it encourages fungal disease. And the Champenois have struggled because there's been a lot of mildew, which is a fungal infection that affects the grapes, and it makes it difficult to harvest clean berries without a lot of treatments. But the other thing is that earlier in the year, in the spring, particularly in southern Champagne, they had some very severe frost. So that kills the buds early on in the season, and therefore potentially the number of berries that the vine will produce. So they've had a difficult year and yields are down. So what does that mean for us as drinkers? I suppose you'll be asking. In the long term, potentially prices will go up even further on champagne because they'll have marginally less to sell and it's been expensive to produce. So it's not a great time for champagne, but the quality from this harvest, I'm told by the few producers I've spoken to, is good. Yields are low, but quality is high.
Patrick Schmidt, thank you so much for joining us as ever on Monocle Radio. And that's all the time we have for today's episode of The Briefing. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to the producer Laura Kramer. Our researchers are Gunnar Grunlid and Sana Germani. Our studio manager was Mariella Bevan. The Briefing's back at the same time tomorrow, but for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye, thank you for listening, and have a great week.